Hello, everyone, and welcome to what I hope will be a very interesting and fun practice session. My name is Lavinia Plonka, and I've been teaching the Feldenkrais method for over 30 years at this point. And my colleague, who you see in the screen also, Conino, has been doing it almost as long. And the two of us came to the Feldenkrais method from different worlds. I came from the theater and expression and exploration of how we find our emotional lives. And Candy came from a background as a physical therapist with a specialty in back pain and complex pain disorders. And over the years, we've come together finding ways to apply the Feldenkrais method in all aspects of life. And it led us to eventually establish what we're calling the Kinetic process, which is taking the brilliance of Feldenkrais lessons as well as other traditions and putting them together in a practical way for people to be real human beings. And so for today's practice session, we've chosen a lesson that's not typically done for beginners, although a beginner could certainly do it. It's an opportunity to explore some of the more sophisticated movements that Moshe Feldenkrais developed based on his work in the martial arts and in other disciplines. So I totally invite you to join. Don't just sit and watch, although you're welcome to. Join Candy as she demonstrates the instructions that I'm going to be giving. We're going to be working together on this lesson. As she's doing it, I'm going to be watching her and learning and adapting as we go. And after the movement, she and I are going to engage in a little bit of a discussion. We call it professional discourse, where I'll be asking Candy reflective questions, and she's going to be reflecting back at me as a teacher so that we both learn and grow together. It's part of the process that we really wanted to share with everybody. So if you're ready, this lesson is an opportunity for you to get more flexible, be more functional, and maybe as you're doing it with us, you'll see some of the direct applications to this lesson. So right away, we're starting untypically. A lot of times people come to Feldenkrais lessons and they expect to start by lying down. But in this case, we're going to start by standing. So find a comfortable place to stand. You're not going to need a whole lot of space for this. Candy has a beautiful studio, of course, and just take a moment to sense how the weight is distributed underneath your feet right now. And how are your arms hanging? Does one arm feel heavier or the other arm? Does one foot feel like it's touching the floor more heavily than the other? If you were to shift your weight from one side to the other, which side feels easier for you? Which side do you like to go to? Do you do it differently to each side? And then pause a moment and just sense the length of the back of yourself, as if you could take your X-ray eyes and bring them into the back of your head and follow down to the back of your head, down the back of your neck, feeling your spine all the way down to your tailbone, and how that also, that sense of verticality connects you to the floor right now. Notice your breath and how you're breathing right now in this upright position, right? Every position that we're in, we're breathing differently. Now, you may need to adjust your stance a little bit for this next exploration. What you're going to do is simply bend down and touch the floor, and then come on back up. So take a few moments to come down, feel the floor, feel how you do it. Please allow your knees to bend as much as you need to be able to reach, but notice the quality, notice the ease or the challenges. As you're going down, is there anything protesting? And as you're coming up, are there areas that you're noticing that are not as free, not as easy? And as you're going down and going up, also just notice how you're adapting your weight. Do you stay right in the middle of yourself? Do you feel yourself shifting from one side to the other? And then the next time that you're standing, just pause a moment. Give yourself a moment to assess. We always take a moment to just feel how we are. And now, thinking about what you just did, allow yourself to come back down to the floor, putting your hands on the floor, bending your knees as much as you need to be comfortable. And take a moment while you're down there to figure that out. You know, maybe you need to move your feet around or move your hands around. Find a place where you can hang out there. By the way, if you really are unable to touch the floor and you want to participate in any way, you could do parts of this movement simply by putting your hands on a chair in front of you and explore some of these movements. You won't be able to do all of it, but you can imagine some and imagine the possibilities. So now that you're down there, just notice what you've done with your head. Is your head looking up? Can you relax your head and just drop your head and let the neck relax while you're there? Just feel what that's like. I mean, is it different when you look up versus when you just allow your head to hang? And does it do anything to your spine? And then see if you can just pick one arm up. You decide which arm and let it kind of dangle in the air. You can lift it up. You can use your shoulder to rotate a little bit. See, it's kind of a little simian kind of feeling. You kind of ape-like. Lifting that arm up, just letting it dangle there. You can let it swing back and forth a little bit and then put it back down. And then pause a second, slowly roll up to give yourself a break. And by the way, anytime you need to take a break, even if I haven't said take a break, you can pause, you can come to standing, you could even lie down. So feel how just having lifted that one arm has changed something for you. Does one arm feel heavier or more alive? And then come on back down, and you're going to try the same thing with your other arm. So again, finding that place where you can hang out, checking into your breathing, making sure that you're not holding your breath, and then just begin lifting that other arm, whichever arm your second arm, letting it dangle. You can even turn your head to look a little bit if you want to, but again, leaving your head and neck relaxed. And then see what it's like to alternate. So one time you're lifting one arm and dangling, and then the next time you're lifting the other arm, and just playing a little bit with letting your whole body turn as you do it. Staying within your comfort range, making sure you're not tensing too much in your belly or in your buttocks. And then slowly come back up to standing and just rest a moment. If you want to, you could just take a little walk around, shift your feet, find ways to make yourself comfortable as you're in the space. And then come on back. And once again, find that position, bringing your hands down to the floor, your knees comfortably bent, your head hanging, your breath soft. And now what would it be like to lift one of your legs? And as you lift your leg, maybe you can turn your hip a little bit. So it's almost like when you dangled your arm and your shoulder moved, could you kind of turn your hip a little bit and let that knee dangle out a little bit? Again, you don't want to slam your foot back down on the floor. Instead, give it time to come down, right? Again, it's almost as if you're levitating your leg and then you're just letting it find the floor again. Noticing what you feel in your spine, in your shoulders. Try it with your other leg. See if it's different with your other leg. What do you have to do to shift? What kind of choices are you making as you shift? And what do you notice about your hip as you do this movement? Is there a moment where you suddenly feel like, oh, I just tensed my neck, or I just gripped in my shoulders? And just be really easy with that. And then come on back up to standing for a moment. Give yourself another break. It's funny how we can do all kinds of really intense activities and not realize or feel that we need a rest. But when we bring our awareness with such specificity to the parts of ourselves, then the brain needs to process and integrate. And that's why we rest in these ways. So now come on back down and see what it's like to alternate your right leg and then your left leg. So you're picking up one leg, rolling your pelvis a little bit, picking up the other leg. Can almost imagine how this might be helpful in the garden, or as you're working on retiling your kitchen floor. And then let it all go and roll onto your back for a moment and just take a rest. So this is your first time on your back. What attracts your attention? The movement of your breath is different when you're lying down than when you're standing up, than when you're bent over with your hands on the floor. Each time you're making different choices. You're experiencing different things. So now come on back up. Again, taking your time. If you want to roll to your side, finding a way to stand again. And now this time, you're going to come down again in the same way, but you want to kind of pretend that you've got a big sponge in one hand, and you're going to start scrubbing the floor, just kind of anywhere your arm can reach. Just play, be light, and just notice where can you go? What stops you from going further? That doesn't mean you have to go further. And again, explore the position of your head. So when I'm really scrubbing the floor, of course, I'm usually looking where I'm scrubbing. But play for a moment and just see, are there times where your head is invited to look up and times where your head feels like it wants to go down? And come back up to standing, pause a moment. And then come on back down and scrub the other side of your floor. And just notice, are there places from this side that are easier to reach than the other side? Notice the moment where you start to strain or strive. And can you be a lazy floor washer? Just kind of piddling around there, having fun with the floor. And then just right from that position, can you come down to the floor and rest on your back? And take another moment. And it's a perfect time to check in with yourself. Maybe as you laid down, you felt that your breathing started to relax, which is an indication that maybe your breathing was not so relaxed when you were working, or maybe you feel like, oh, what a relief, which may mean that you were working harder than you need to, right? We use the rest to also give ourselves information about how we were. So now come on back up to that same position. In some lessons, Feldenkrais called these the 4 points, right? The 2 hands, the 2 feet. And so now just begin to be a little bit playful. Can you play with lifting an arm and putting it down, and then lifting a leg and then putting it down, and then lifting another arm, and just play with looking at all of the different places where you can lift a limb, let it dangle, play around with going in a circle, arm, arm, leg, leg, or alternating one side and then the other side, or even diagonally, just kind of playing around a little bit. And then pause and just come up to standing. And just feel yourself in standing for a moment. I find sometimes these lessons that involve going down and up and down and up have like a little side effect, because they're influencing not just the circulation of my breath, but the circulation of my blood and what's going on in the spine as you're bending and erecting and bending and erecting. Important skills that we want to hold on to, especially as we age. So now come on back down. And could you begin exploring what it would be like to lift, let's say, your right hand and your left leg, and then put it down. Just that side, just lifting the right and putting it down, and playing around with your range, playing around with your direction, playing around with how you do it. Again, seeing what are your possibilities and what's happening underneath the right foot and the left hand. Do you feel like that's balanced? Do you shift in a certain way? And what's happening to your head and neck again? And then go ahead and play with the opposite diagonal. And see, is that different? Do you feel more balanced in this diagonal than the other diagonal? When you think about it, when we're walking, we're always having this oppositional relationship, this contralateral relationship in our walk. So sometimes when you see that one side is stronger or more mobile, it gives you information about how you're carrying yourself through life when you're vertical. So come on up to standing now. And take another walk around. And just let your attention travel to noticing that diagonal connection between the parts of yourself. And then come on back. And come back to that same position. Your both hands on the floor, your knees bent. And now we start to play with balance. What would it be like to lift the right arm and the right leg at the same time? Try it a few times and just feel what does your pelvis have to do? Where does your weight have to go in order to be able to do this homolateral exploration? Where do you distribute your effort? Is it all in the wrist? And by the way, if the wrist has a problem, you can always do fists if you need to. And then try the other side. Again, you can almost feel what it's like, why it's important for us to have a diagonal relationship. When you try to do something like this, you can feel how your balance is much more precarious. And then let everything go and roll back onto your back and take another rest. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to lift all four at the same time. And just notice if there's any changes taking place in your spine or where the back of your head touches the floor. And now come back up to that same position, but now we're going to go into new territory, exploring the power of your pelvis and your ability to move through space. So putting your hands back down on the floor. And you may find that you need to bend your knees slightly differently for this next approximation, because now instead of lifting, you're going to kind of do a little bit of a swivel, as if you wanted to bring your left knee over to your right elbow and then back again. So it's a little bit of a twisting, a little bit of a turning. And as you do that, you might find the temptation to look over your right shoulder. So feeling how the left knee just bends and moves over. And as you do that, you can see how you could gradually, without any discomfort or trouble, slowly find yourself sitting on your left butt. And then reversing it, right? Reversibility is such an important factor for our ability to survive in life, the ability to recover from a fall, to be able to recover from a fail, right? We want to be able to feel that we can reverse direction, back away, find another way out. And then the next time that you're down there, just rest on your back for a moment. And then come on back up. This is one of those really symmetrical lessons. We get to do the same thing from one side and then from the other side. So placing your hands back on the floor, bending your knees, and then explore taking the right knee over. Start small, even though you know the end, right? You know the end already because you've experienced it on the other side. Your brain is so ready to go. But can you allow it to develop? Can you look at the nuances and the differences as you're going, beginning to include the turning of your head to look over your shoulder? Noticing, when do you need to exhale? Are you exhaling? What's it like to do it if you're holding your breath? Does the movement change if you're holding your breath? Does it make it easier or more difficult? And then, of course, please start breathing if you were holding your breath. Finding the floor and finding how you sit, looking over that left shoulder. And then just take a moment and standing erect for a moment to just give yourself a little bit of a rest. And when you come back down again, try alternating. So bringing your hands down to the floor and bring one knee over to the side, sitting down, looking over your shoulder, feeling the whole chain of mobility, right? You feel like it's like a kinetic melody that moves from the hip through the back and over the shoulder, finding how you can see, use your own perceptive ability to know your trajectory and sense where you're going so that you've got the power to be able to mobilize yourself simply, easily, and then can you speed it up without losing any of the elegance that you found slowly? And of course, each person do it according to your own sense of comfort. But as you speed it up, you can start to see where you develop some maybe habitual grabbing, but also see where you can let go, right? I love this saying of Feldenkrais. He used to say, you want to find speed without haste, right? Haste implies tension, but can I just float from one side to the other side? And then the next time that you're sitting, just roll onto your back and rest. So let's take it another step further, coming back up to the same position. Putting your hands on the floor, your knees bent. This time, though, as you do the swivel, let's start with your left leg. Again, could you think about, instead of the knee, could you straighten your left leg so that your foot just slides like a straight leg all the way over to the right and you come to sitting? Just explore what that movement feels like. And then can you get back up, keeping your leg as straight as possible? Obviously, at a certain point, it bends. So finding when do you have to drop your pelvis and how high up do you have to lift your pelvis in order to get yourself back to that position? Just kind of swooshing yourself over. And again, remembering that you can look over your shoulder. So that means that your shoulder girdle is involved in this process. Your whole thoracic spine is dancing with you as you do this movement. And then take a break the next time and just come up to standing to get yourself off of your hands. And then come on back down and try the same thing on the other side. And give yourself permission to savor these moments where you feel like everything is connecting from the foot all the way up to your head. And then notice what initiates to bring you back, right? So when you begin, how do you begin? Do you begin with your foot? Do you begin with your hip? Do you begin with your shoulder? And then what brings you back? Can you feel that your torso is so powerful? It can just bring you right back, and there's a minimum of effort in your buttocks and in your thigh. And then play with alternating, right? One time sliding one foot underneath, coming to sit, enjoying the view on that side. and then coming to sit on the other side, taking in that, right? Because our eyes are always taking in our environment, unless, of course, your eyes are closed. But this is one of those lessons where bringing yourself in orientation to the room can be so incredibly helpful, right? Our vestibular system, which tells us a lot about where we are in space, is having a field day right now because you're going down and up and down and up. And so finding that smoothness, if it feels like it would be fun for you, if it feels like it would be pleasurable, play around with your tempo. See what it's like to go faster, and what happens in your breath and in your core as you increase the speed. When do you start to rely on old habits to get to where you need to go? And what can you let go of? And then let it all go and rest on your backs again. Taking a moment to appreciate the sensation in your arms, in your legs. Noticing maybe there's a movement of, you could call it life, you could call it energy, you could call it blood circulation, but there's a sensation or a quality of vibration that comes through us when we have had a chance to be with ourselves in this way, of feeling more alive. And then slowly come back up to standing. And take a moment in standing to just sense your posture now, remembering some of the things that we checked in with before, how your arms are hanging, the weight underneath your feet, the length of the front of yourself, the back of yourself. Take a little walk around and just notice how, it's kind of funny to say, well, I've just been throwing myself around on the floor, and yet how does that influence the way I move through space vertically, right? We're a very unique species in that we are always walking on our 2 feet. And when we come down to all fours, which is very stable, we can play around with all of these different ways of using our spine and our pelvis. And then come on back. And maybe you remember at the beginning of the lesson, you just bent over to touch the floor. And see, what's that like for you right now, to just bend over and touch the floor? And, come up and try it a couple of times and just feel, has anything changed in your flexibility, in your contact, in your trajectory? How is it different from when you began? And that is the end of this lesson. Thank you so much, Candy, for being such a willing student. And so come on over and we'll talk a little bit.
Thank you for the nice hair.
I was just going to say, usually we do get Feldenkrais hair, or Feldy hair, we call it, but it's usually from rolling around on the floor. But I see that when you're upside down, it completely changes everything. So it's interesting because the first question I was going to ask you was, what changes did you experience?
Well, first of all, was when I was bending afterward. And we should review. This is not my first, second, third, fourth, or 400th time of doing the lesson. But I deliberately have not done the lesson at all in the last weeks because I wanted to sort of come at it as someone who wasn't conditioned or lubricated or programmed or whatever. So I think the thing about my bending was when I was bending to begin with, I was playing with all kinds of ways of initiating. Oh, go with my head, go with my butt back, go with. Interestingly for me, I was to the lesson for the very first time. I initiated my bending at my solar plexus, which I've never done before. And it just came. I initiated at the solar plexus first, which of course brought my head forward. And that went back before my pelvis went back, created a different, it created less demand on my arms and hands to put them down. And that made me, of course, bear weight on a different part of my foot. Now, of course, I want to initiate it and go back to that lifting, especially lifting same side arm and leg, because for one thing, when I did it, lifting right arm and right leg, my left butt cramped. Always good when you're on the screen. But I, found my way around it. I just wanted to see if the initiation changed. That was one thing. In standing, of course, that is that glorious feeling that I could feel that line of force from my heels all the way up the back of me to my head, which is that sense of just power and balance and composure, which I love, which everyday stuff like scrubbing the floor doesn't do. So those are the two things I noticed the most. What did you notice about what changed in me?
The things that I noticed were, well, first of all, when you sped up, when you were going from side to side and speeding up, I felt like you started to make different choices. That's why I brought up the question about what initiates, because it was almost as if your brain went, oh, well, if I want to go fast, I can't do it this way. I have
Exactly right.
some other way to do it. And so that inspired me to go, well, geez, if I was, teaching a group of people, that might be a really good question to ask people as they're going through it, so that people are invited to think that, oh, yeah, I do have a choice. I don't have to start with my foot. I could look at other options.
And I was really exploring those options when we were going faster. And really, if we had had longer, I would have explored way more options to go way faster. For instance, to go faster, you can't come all the way back up. So where's the balance point of that, right? Between the up far enough to get your leg through, but not so far up that it's, all drama and you lose your speed.
So that brings me to a question in terms of, teaching the lesson, because often if we add that level of challenge that you described, oh, I wish I could have done it longer and gone faster and faster and faster and explored it in different ways, a certain kind of straining appears in our students, and then a certain kind of fatigue, and then we get diminishing results. So it's like finding that balance of challenging and yet making people feel safe, that they don't have to perform. Because also what happens in a group is there's always one person in the group that's going shoo, 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 and then people judge themselves. And so trying to create an environment where I can challenge myself, but not feel like I have to perform. And also at the same time, still have time to observe myself. I'm sure you have a lot of things to say about that.
I have a lot of, me. So when I'm teaching this lesson and I want to go there, then what I do is I give people a very short time to go faster and faster, faster. Then rest on your back. Think, what will you do next? What will your next experiment be? Back, faster, faster, done. So I have lots of short, quick, and I will often propose things that I see in the room so that everybody can try on everybody else's solution. And I will, even when those things are maybe less efficient strategies, I will still propose them because I'm not trying to get people to do it right. I'm not trying to get people to do it gracefully. I'm trying to get people to understand all of the ways that they could do it so that they have choices. Also, I'm trying to communicate that, in fact, there is no right way. There's only another way. Because, the way I'm going to do it if I'm on my mat on the camera is different than if I am in my garden and I do not want to squish that new little echinacea that I just planted. And the only way I can do it is this way, which did happen last weekend.
Which brings me to my next question. I was just wondering, and of course I know you've done this lesson, but scrubbing the floor, protecting the echinacea.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other practical applications to learning how to sit on your butt sideways like that? Did you feel any as you were doing it? Was there a moment like where you go, oh yeah, I've been here, or oh, I could really use this?
Well, let's review. I am a grandmother. When you have a grandchild, you have to get up and down from the floor, especially when they're little. You get up, down, and you need to do that quickly. And sometimes you need to do that with a child in your arms, or a bunch of toys in your arms, or juice and a cracker in your arms. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, besides being in the garden, which of course is mine and your kind of most common thing. Definitely scrubbing the floor, but what is even more than that, and this is just revealing my tiny little OCD problem, the baseboards. If you ever scrub your baseboards, because listen, you have to get close to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to get close to them, and you have to figure out what to do with your legs, and you have to figure out how to get down to the next baseboard. So I'm saying, everyone out there who loves a dust-free, clean baseboard, this is the way. This is the brilliant way. So you can do that. Also, this came up not for me, but somebody in my family who is not as flexible or as practiced as I am, was in a group when everybody was sitting on the floor and the room was fairly crowded. And this particular person needed to get up to go to the bathroom without making a big disturbance. This has led to now 2 weeks of training in this very thing so that one can get up from the floor when there's a room full of, for instance, people meditating on the floor, when you don't want to make a big fuss and you don't want to do a lot of grunting and groaning and kicking the person next to you.
So as you were speaking, I thought, the other thing I like about this lesson, because there's a lot of lessons that we both know where you twirl up to sitting or you spiral up to standing. And this does not involve the spiral. This is very contained in itself. So I love the example that you just gave, because again, it's a practical dealing with a situation. So that was great. And I want to come back to one more question. And that's when you encountered obstacles, even though you've done this lesson many times, like, for example, you had the cramping in your butt, or, what happens when you encounter an obstacle? How do you work your way around it or with it or through it? Obviously, one solution is always to just rest or to just imagine. But sometimes we don't want to give up. And so then what do we do when we encounter those resistances in our lesson or in our life?
Well, for me, an obstacle is simply a problem to be solved. I don't have obstacles. I have problems to be solved. In this lesson, there are two obstacles for me. One was that darn left butt cramping. Where did that come from? Okay, so, I'm an anatomy geek. I know which muscles are cramping. I'm fortunate that way. I know what those muscles do. I have to say to myself quickly, this will never do. Therefore, I need to switch the way that I am sending that force up from my foot up to my hip so I can get to the more midline aspect of my hip rather than expecting myself to be supporting myself on the more outside aspect of my hip. So I switched what I was doing with my foot. No, that didn't work. I switched the way that I was using my right arm. That was better. But what really worked was that I folded my ribs on the left so that I think that made the lever arm shorter. But I have 206 bones, all original. And I just have to keep going through them and finding out what of them can I use differently. And I am just going to be logical like that. There is no obstacle. It's a problem to be solved for me. Now, my other thing is, I have this right arm, which is weak because, I had this problem 25 years ago, which just still lingers in a little way. So that arm is weak. So I had to find a way. Now can I use my right arm more without now doing something dastardly to my right arm, which is also not an obstacle. It is a problem to be solved. That problem I've solved a million times in a different way. And the truth is that when my arm is just right under my shoulder, it is the best place for it in the world. I have learned that. It's just that if it's a little bit to one side, a little forward, a little too far, not a good thing. But of course, that was the problem with my hip also. So what I know so well about my arm is the thing I had to remember and recalibrate and rediscover in my hip. So yeah, just problems to be solved.
So I love that you put it that way, because if I look at something as an obstacle, then I feel I'm not able to see as many solutions, right? So many times I'm just like in front of a wall and it's like, okay, I can't go any further. There's the wall. But if I'm looking at it as a problem to be solved and it engages the brain in a different way, I become curious, I become interested, I become clever even as I'm starting to figure out how to solve this particular puzzle. And that is by changing the attitude, it allows me to learn as opposed to give up or to fight or to force. So I just wanted to, say that. And great. Well, I want to thank you. This has been so fun.
Thank you. It was probably way more fun for me.
It was actually fun teaching you and watching you do the movement. And I hope those of you who were watching had an opportunity to join in with Candy and try it as well, because it is really fun to explore your options as you're moving through space. Thank you, Candy.
Thank you, Lavinia.